With a decent amount of wins under my belt and every emblem in Pokemon Pocket, I think I can confidently suggest the top 5 best decks to use in the second and hardest PvP challenge event for Mythical Islands. Hey guys, Zen here, and today we're going to be talking about the best decks to use in the Mythical Islands SP Emblems event. But before we start, I just want to let you guys know that I am currently updating all my decks over on my Untapped link, which you can find in this video's description, as well as every future video's description. Be sure to check it out and bookmark it so that way you can be the first ones to catch all my spicy deck cooks once set 2 drops later this month. With that, let's get started with the most budget-friendly deck list in today's video, and that's Aggro Blaine. This deck comes out to being about 770 pack points, which makes it the cheapest deck in today's video. However, still super consistent for getting you those quick and easy 5 wins in the SP Emblem event. Now you have 3 types of basic Pokemon in this deck list. You have your Vulpix, your Ponyta from Mythical Islands, and your Farfetch'd. First, let's start off with Farfetch'd, who is a great early game Pokemon who applies pressure for only 1 energy and dealing 40 damage. However, your main heavy hitters are going to have to be your other 2 fire type Pokemon. First is the Ponyta from the Mythical Islands. We have 2 of them, where if you flip a coin in its heads, your stomp does 40 damage from a basic Pokemon, which is pretty much Farfetch'd, however with a couple extra steps such as flipping coins. With this, we're running 2 variants of Rapidash, one from Genetic Apex, so that way you only need 1 fire energy to deal that 40 damage Fire Main, and another Rapidash, however this one's from the Mythical Islands expansion, that also flips a coin for 2 energies and can deal up to 100 damage. Pair this up with your Blaine card and you could deal up to 130 damage, wiping out a ton of Pokemon in the process. Yeah, Celebi, sayonara. We also have our Ninetales here that deals a whopping 90 damage for 2 energy, which is really great. However, you do have to discard a fire energy. So as long as you're not behind on energy, you can always apply that fire energy on the start of your turn and continuously deal 90 damage or up to 120 with Blaine. 2 Sabrinas to disrupt your opponent and switch out for easier targets such as anything under 90 HP, so that way your Ninetales can easily pick up some prize points. 2 Pokeballs, 2 Professor Researchers to help you get the cards you need from your deck, as well as some XPs, because every single Pokemon in this deck only retreat for 1 energy cost. A super affordable deck list that honestly, time and time again, has never let me down in any of these emblem events. Now, almost doubling the cost of pack points, everything else in today's deck list is going to be a bit more expensive, mainly because we're starting to see more EX Pokemon, max copies of 2. However, I will try to do my best to recommend what other cards you can run instead of those EX Pokemon cards at max copies of 2s, meaning if you only have 1 of them, I'll give you another recommendation of what you could run. For this, we're looking at a very consistent fighting aggro deck list, which I actually took into a recent tournament. The cost of this is about $16.75, and again, that cost is going to be coming mainly from that Aerodactyl EX. However, if you only have 1 copy, maybe you can double up your copies for Hitmonlee or even Marshadow. But since we are running 2 copies of the Aerodactyl EX, let's explain what this card does. Well, if you're going first, this card is insanely powerful, because if you can have your old Amber in your opening hand, play that down, and on the following turn, evolve onto your bench your Aerodactyl EX, while your opponent's active Pokemon can no longer evolve, which is really good early game pressure. However, if you're going second, well then you have things like the Mythical Islands Mankey that can deal up to 50 damage if you flip a heads. If you flip tails, it does nothing. You could also, I guess, pair this with Giovanni and one-shot a lot of basic Pokemon on your first turn if you get lucky. However, if you evolve into your Primeape, you don't have to give it any more energy and it's guaranteed to dish out 50 damage, which is why this deck list is super fast and super aggressive. We have a single Hitmonlee. You could run 2 if you want to, and this is to help counter other Pokemon cards such as Magikarp or anything else on their bench that you can deal a ton of damage to with Primeape, and then maybe possibly switch them out with Sabrina and have your Hitmonlee finish things off. But it's always good to have Marshadow in the back with at least 1 energy attached to them. So that way, if your opponent knocks out your Hitmonlee, your Primeape, your Mankey, or even your old Amber, you could always pivot in your Marshadow and hit him with Revenge for 100 damage. We have 2 Giovannis and 2 Sabrinas, 2 Professor Researchers, 2 Old Ambers, 2 X-Speeds, and 2 Pokeballs. A pretty strong and pretty consistent deck list. Speaking of consistent deck list, the next deck we have is actually right in the middle in terms of expensiveness, and that's going to be the Mewtwo ramp deck list. Now this one's probably the most consistent winning deck list in today's top 5. However, it does require you to find your cards, but it does run a very consistent deck to in fact help you find said cards, mainly with the new addition of Mythical Slab, where you look at the top card of your deck, and if that is a psychic Pokemon, you get to put it in your hand, which means you find your Curlias and you could find your Gardevoirs. However, if it's not, it goes to the bottom, which means you could lose your Professors and your Pokeballs. But we're running 2 copies of Mewtwo EX here, which makes it a little bit expensive, but if you only have 1, then I'd recommend maybe running 2 Jinx. We are also running 2 Ralts, 2 Curlias, and 2 Gardevoirs. However, the Gardevoir is 3 diamonds. However, I would really prioritize getting 2 copies of Gardevoir. So if you had enough pack points to get either Gardevoir or a Mewtwo EX, a second Mewtwo EX, I would always recommend the Gardevoir, because Mewtwo EX pretty much does nothing if you can't get your Gardevoir online, and just having 2 copies improves your odds of actually drawing them. We have a single Giovanni to help your Mewtwo dish out an extra 10 damage and potentially knock out 60 HP basic Pokemon, a Sabrina for disruption, a Leaf to pull back your Mewtwo EX if it's in danger, 2 Professors, 2 Pokeballs, 2 Mythical Slabs like we talked about, and 2 Potions to keep your Mewtwo healthy. Now you're probably wondering, why is there a Jinx? Well, because I am almost certain you guys are going to unfortunately be going up against Celebes. Yeah, everyone's probably going to be flipping coins for Celebes, and Celebes, any coin flip decks, they are not going to be your best bet at winning such an event. You need 5 consecutive wins. You don't want to just bet it all on luck. You need a bit of consistency. So if your opponents want to see if they can get lucky with Celebi, or at most try to ruin your streak, you have your option of Jinx to come back in with 2 energy and pretty much one-shot any Celebi that ever thought of popping off. So if you have these cards, really consider using a deck like this for the SP event. Moving on to the second most expensive deck list in today's video, and that's going to be the Pika Striker build, which runs 2 Pikachu EXs, 1 Zapdos EX, an Electabuzz from Mythical Islands, 2 Blitzels, and 2 Zebstricas, as well as 2 Detonays. First, let's talk about the main hero of this deck, and that's got to be Zebstrika. This thing can help you deal damage to any of your opponent's Pokemon, including their benched Pokemon, and that is a total of 30 damage. Now, you add that to Pikachu's already 90 max output if you have a full bench of Electric-type Pokemon, and that comes out to being 120, which means you can get some easy knockouts. Or you can go the route of Electabuzz, and that comes out to being 130, with Electabuzz's 40. We have Zapdos here being the only Pokemon in this deck list that isn't weak to fighting, which is pretty important, as well as Detonay that can paralyze your opponent's Pokemon and just stop them in their tracks, especially if they're a basic Pokemon that doesn't evolve. You can just stop them from playing the game while you ramp everything else up on your side, as long as you're hitting heads. We have a single Giovanni, a single Sabrina for disruption, 2 Professors, 2 Potions, 2 X-Speeds, and 2 Pokeballs. However, if you don't have 2 copies of Pikachu EX, or you're missing that Zapdos, because again, these are going to be the most expensive cards in this deck list, well then I would recommend running another basic electric type Pokemon. Maybe even another basic and a stage 1, something like a Voltorb and Electrode if you only have 1 Pikachu EX. However, if you do have 2 Pikachu EXs, then I highly recommend you run something like this build. It is extremely consistent, and if you're going second, almost always by turn 2, you're dishing out 90 damage, as long as you're seeing all of your lightning basic Pokemon. And now the moment you've all been waiting for, the most expensive deck list in today's video, and that's going to be the Gyarados stall deck list at around 2,000 pack points. Now, you may be familiar with this deck, or you may be unfamiliar, but this deck list took the Mythical Islands expansion by storm, rivaling even the Mewtwo and Pikachu meta decks. Because if we're talking about the strongest meta deck from the Mythical Islands expansion, well then it's got to be this Gyarados variant, and it runs the Magikarp from Mythical Islands as well as the Gyarados EX. Now, the strategy of this deck list is to get your Gyarados online from the bench, because once you have 4 energy, that rampaging Whirlpool is menacing. And in the meantime, you'll throw out things like your Druddigon and use it as a frontliner so that way your opponents take that 20 damage whenever they want to deal damage to this Druddigon. If they don't want to proc your Rough Skin, no problem, you have another Pokemon being Greninja that has Water Shuriken that can still apply that 20 damage to any Pokemon on your opponent's side of the field, which effectively brings your Gyarados' damage output to about 160, potentially 180 a turn if you have 2 Greninjas online from your bench. We have a single Misty here because I've said this time and time again, the consistency is key here. Running 2 Misties is just a waste of space in this deck. If you get lucky with Misty and you high roll, you win your game. If you don't, you need to be strategic, still have your frontline Druddigon, build up your Greninja in the back line, and then give your energies to your Magikarp or Gyarados. Speaking of energy, we are only running water type energy, for the sole reason of consistency again. We don't need a fire type energy. Our Drud is never doing damage. It is just there to frontline. Other very useful tips is if you're going up against a fighting type deck or a lightning type deck, you need to be cautious about Zebstrika and Hitmonlee, which means you don't play Magikarp until you can confidently guarantee an evolution the following turn. So you have to be strategic about that placement. We also have a single Sabrina, 2 Leafs to pull back our Drud to go into that Gyarados or even that Greninja, 2 Professors, and 2 Pokeballs. There you guys have it. Those are my top 5 best decks to use in the Mythical Islands SP Emblem event. Let me know in the comments down below which deck has helped you acquire your 5 consecutive wins. Don't forget to like the video if this helped you out, and consider subscribing for more quality Pokemon Pocket content. With that, I will catch you guys in the next video. Good luck with your matches!